Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Good evening for those of us who are here in Nigeria. Good day for those who are in other climes where we are still that have not gotten to evening. You're all most welcome to today's session. My name is Maxwell. We'll be starting off shortly. But I'll quickly want the admin team to please share the link for today's attendance. Attendance is quite important. It's important that we all, I think, yeah, the link is already there on the platform. Please, participants, I would join us to please quickly fill in the attendance for today's session. We'll just give another 2 minutes or thereabout, and then we'll start with the initial introductions, and then we can start. Once again, welcome. Okay, so you're once more welcome. For those who are just joining us, we would start off shortly. On behalf of the Director of the National Center for Excellence in Sickle Cell Disease Research and Training at the University of Abuja, Professor Biagelin Nodu, I want to welcome all of us to today's weekly session. She will join us. She's actually in transit, so she's on a trip. So today we have something special, and I think I'm going to ask someone to do the introduction of our faculty for today. But she's someone, just to give us a peep, she's someone who has a lot of experience when it comes to compliance and quality assurance issues. So I want to welcome Kathy Greff to please introduce our faculty today, who will be talking to us about challenges that can emanate from multi-site clinical trial or research studies. Kathy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. So it's a pleasure to introduce you to Ms. Julie Chamberlain, who will be giving today's lecture on the challenges of managing multi-site studies. Ms. Chamberlain is a research compliance officer at Harvard University in the US. Her work centers on enhancing Harvard's research framework through robust compliance strategies and guidance on sponsored projects. This position builds on Ms. Chamberlain's specialization in IRB reliance and quality assurance. She also contributes to the growth of upcoming clinical professionals, ensuring that the next generation is well-versed in ethical research practice. Her dedication is reflected in developing compliance programs that not only adhere to regulations, but also foster a culture of integrity and responsibility in research. So thank you very much, Ms. Chamberlain. I'm looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. It is a true honor to be here. I'm so excited to have been invited, and I'm excited to jump right into our slides tonight. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Give me 1 second. Okay. Can everybody just yell if there's a problem, but hopefully everybody can see these slides. So we'll just jump right into it. When we think about clinical trials, there's certainly a lot of them that involve multi-site studies. So working together is definitely something that comes up often in this world. I have no disclosures and relevance to this activity this evening. Okay, so let's jump right into it. When we think about multi-site studies, we're not just thinking that they are necessarily limited to one country or even one area of any geographic region. Oftentimes, there is a real benefit and a real need to having multi-site studies that are global, because diseases oftentimes act globally. They don't just act out in one certain spot. So a lot of the studies that we think about when we think about clinical trials certainly have this in common. Okay, so then we think about, okay, well, who initiates these studies typically, or how do they even begin? So a lot of these studies are what we call sponsor initiated. And just a quick disclaimer, in clinical research, there's all kinds of names for the same thing, and it is confusing and we should do better. But for the purposes of this lecture, when I'm talking about sponsor initiated, we're thinking about things that are typically we see on a large global scale. So some of you might be familiar with the IQVIA organization. Medpace and Parexel, those are also examples or just names that you may have come across for what we call contract research organizations. You will often hear those referred to as CROs. And those are really, bigger companies. They're better equipped to kind of handle a lot of moving parts. They probably have teams all over the world. So they're often larger scale in nature and really, again, well equipped to handle these kinds of studies. Another sponsor that we might think of, or somebody who's kind of putting on the clinical trial, might be a pharmaceutical company. So some examples of those here: Pfizer, Novartis, Sanofi, lots of different pharmaceutical companies. These are certainly just a very, very few. But they can also initiate clinical trials or be the sponsor, as we were kind of referring to it here. And then those two organizations might also just work together. So they're not all solely independent of one another, right? So a pharmaceutical company may work together with a CRO to organize and manage a trial. So again, it's not independent in nature, and oftentimes you'll see a very common theme right off the top here of the presentation, that there's a lot of overlap. So you'll see that more to come. Okay. Another possibility for who might initiate a clinical trial, it could be what we call investigator initiated, and investigator thinking principal investigator of the study. So these studies are probably often smaller in scope in nature because one investigator is much smaller than many people working for a CRO. So these might be more when we think about maybe our rare diseases or things like that, where you might have funding and resources to look at a smaller population of participants. And then in the investigator-initiated trials, when that's the case, that investigator is then responsible for the entire management and conduct of that trial. So not only are they responsible for the participants, but they are also then responsible for the regulatory requirements and any ethical requirements that may be involved as well. So they are very busy, those investigators who do those trials solo. Okay. Next one, we just think about, okay, what are the rationale and advantages for even thinking about doing a multi-site design? Okay, so first, if we just think of the rationale, why are we doing this? Sharing of resources is always a helpful thing when we're researching new ideas, new materials, new medicines. It's so everyone here knows how hard it can be to get resources. So anytime we can work together as a team, it's a win-win. Then we think about broader scientific knowledge having a larger global impact on a wider population. So for instance, if we are limiting our population to one geographic spot on the map, we might be capturing some really good information that can help us treat this spot on the map. But there's so many people in this world, and we want to make sure that the science and the time and the effort isn't just helping a certain subgroup of people, that it's really helping the larger good and the bigger benefit. The next bullet point, recruitment of eligible participants. Again, this makes sense. If we think bigger, then we have a bigger pool of which to fish from. So our eligibility requirements in clinical trials can sometimes be pretty specific, not just our inclusion criteria, but our exclusion criteria. So we have two sides from. But one of the things that we think about, hopefully is, again, bigger surface area, bigger area from which we can hopefully pool. And then the last bullet point, potential regulatory requirement. Regulatory requirements all over the world are changing at a rapid pace, most certainly here in the States. So when we do clinical research, we have not only the medical kind of components that we think about, But then we have a whole nother set of regulations to abide by and think about. So in some areas, working together is a regulatory requirement. For instance, in the states, they have said that if you have a multi-site trial, that you have to go through only one IRB or ethics review, and we'll talk more about those later. But that's now a regulatory requirement. So before that was always optional, but it wasn't something that you had to do. Again, just an example, but thinking about not only the research itself, but then what are the rules surrounding research to think about. Okay, so then if we think about the advantages, we can almost think about how the rationale on the left directly impacts an advantage on the right. So for example, when sharing resources, we all know that we have much more manageable workloads. And with that also comes just access to people who might be experts in the area or resources that perhaps you may not have available solely at your site. Next, when we think about who this is helping, we want to make sure that the work and the effort that not only that we're putting in as research staff, but the time and the effort that our research participants have dedicated and given to us is not for waste, right? So we want to make sure that their effort is going to the biggest good. And that's something that we always want to keep in mind. And again, is a huge, huge advantage when we think about multi-site studies that are global. Then for our statisticians or our data professionals in the room, you will appreciate that a larger sample size always leads to a better result, right? So the more information we have to analyze, the more solid that information is. And that gives us a better framework and founding on which to keep going. And then, yes, it can be a regulatory requirement. And sometimes we are beholden to those regulations. But, you know, at the end of the day, most people in the field of research are there for the same reasons and the same drive that their neighbors are. And it really does bring about this sense of community and collaboration that you might not otherwise have. It's kind of like beginning to work with family. Yes, there's bumps along the road and sometimes things happen, but you really become a very strong team when you work in these multi-site studies because you're just interacting so often. Okay. So multi-site studies don't come without some of their challenges, and we'll just jump right into some of those. I just mentioned regulatory requirements. Not only are those different in every country, but they're changing rapidly. And so it's important to make sure that you have somebody on the ground on your team that can keep up and realistically understand and handle what the regulatory requirements are. It's a very in many places it's its own job, and I realize that many physicians and research staff wear many different hats when it comes to what they're doing behind the scenes. So, just thinking about the regulatory requirements can be a lot. And so that can be a challenge in some instances when thinking about whether you are equipped to have a multi-site study. Okay, so then when we're working with human subjects, we not only have to think about the regulations surrounding research, but we would be nothing without our research participants. So if we aren't extra careful and extra diligent in the ethical review surrounding their participation, then we're not doing it for the right reasons. Having said all of that, again, just like the regulatory review differs from country to country, so does the ethic committee review. Or here in the States, we will call it the IRB review, which stands for the Institutional Review Board review. They perform the same function. They review the human subjects element of the research and make sure that there's no mistreatment and that everybody is being treated equitably and fairly. So again, when we think about multi-site studies, we have to make sure that that's happening at each site, or that we've got somehow made, taken care of that review. Okay, clinical trials come with a lot of materials. Any research, I'm sorry, I shouldn't just say clinical trials. Any research comes with a lot of supply management. So really kind of even thinking from a basic standpoint, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but just do you start with, do you have the space? Do you have just the basic space to keep a lot of maybe lab kits or medicines or, whatever it may be nearby? And not only do you have the space, do you have the equipment? But then you add on the potential for shipping internationally, which then carries its set of problems on its own, right? Shipping internationally can be challenging. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of sometimes unanticipated slowdowns. There are just things that you have to stay flexible with. And that can be hard when we're dealing with participants on the other end who are part of a rigid protocol, right? Where we're asking them to maybe come in every, I'm just making something up, but maybe once a month or maybe once a week, sometimes more than that. So if there's a bump in the road with the supply management, that can then lead to problems with protocol deviations, and maybe a participant, it just delays everything. So something to think about there. Then training and consistency. This is hard even on a single site level sometimes, because research can just have a lot of turnover. We're working with a lot of people maybe in the beginning of their careers, and they have a lot of moving parts, and so maybe they're here for a little bit and they go, or whatever the reason may be. Making sure that you have a strong study team that knows what they're doing and is well equipped to go by the protocol to reproduce the same steps for the scientific method's purpose, that can be a challenge. So when you think about not only doing that at one site, but potentially increasing that on a global level and ensuring that there's a standard and a consistency of training and education can be hard. And it's not only something that you do at the beginning of the study and then you get to kind of wipe your hands of it and think, okay, well, my job here is done. The study is a living, breathing thing until it's ended. So the study will continue to evolve because it's working with real life humans. So there might be protocol amendments or modifications or things that will maybe cause new versions of protocols to come out or new versions of documents that you're using on a really consistent basis to come out. And how do you make sure that teams on global levels are all getting that same level of material distribution and then education? We don't want to just drop things in people's laps and expect them to understand what they mean. So that can be a challenge. With that, I'm sure to no one's surprise will come communication, right? So again, this, even as I just said for the last thing, managing at one site can be difficult. There's a lot of moving parts to a study, a research study. And so making sure you know who's doing what, who to contact. And this is always kind of a nice place to mention in regards to multi-site studies. Sometimes there is a real benefit to having like a general contact. For instance, a general email box that maybe a study team is managing instead of one person. Either somebody goes on medical leave, or again, in the example of just turnover, what happens when all of a sudden your study manager, your project manager isn't there anymore at another site? You don't want to interrupt the study flow and the mechanics just because we can't get a hold of someone anymore. If we can plan ahead and try to ensure that we think about that before, hopefully it won't be an issue as we get to that point and get into the study itself. Okay. All right. So when multi-site studies are occurring, the sponsor or the person initiating the study needs to select the sites that are operating the day-to-day functions of the study protocol. So they have a job too, in that they can't just accept everybody who would like to participate. And it's not that that sounds kind of harsh, but you want to make sure that you're going into a situation in which you're going to be successful. So not only for ourselves, again, but for the participants, right? Do we have the materials and the proper site to be one of the study sites? So when the sponsor is evaluating sites to select, one of the first things that they will evaluate is just the experience and the ability of the clinical staff, meaning the physicians and whomever else may be there. In research, it can vary greatly. Sometimes we have nurses, sometimes we have coordinators. So, again, kind of, I'll just say study staff and hopefully cast a broad net to collect a lot of people. Then again, they want to also make sure that the facility is able to just do the data the study and not be overwhelmed, right? So in many instances, a site is also a doctor's office or a hospital, and they still have to function too. So, just doing a clinical research study in an area that's already functioning doesn't always make it seamless, right? So sometimes it can be a bit clunky to kind of make the two blend or bring the two together without interrupting the patients or participants. So they want to make sure on all ends that it's a good fit. And then access to the population. With research studies, there's typically always an enrollment goal. And when we think about setting sites up for success, research, putting it together takes a lot of time, effort, money, resources on the back end. So, and approval, not only does it take all of that effort to get something up and running, but then you have to get all of the approvals too. So once you've got this whole thing put together, that took a lot of time and effort on behalf of a lot of people, or maybe just a team of one sometimes, you want to make sure that you can hit that enrollment goal. If the enrollment goal is 50 people in 5 months, and realistically, you can only bring maybe 2 people to the table in 5 months, then they're probably not going to think about your site because, again, they need all of it to work. There's been a huge investment on the back end to make things work. So that's something they think about. Again, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but there's not only incorporating the actual research study and making sure that the protocol is followed, but then there's making sure that you've got the time and resources to manage the ethics requirement. And again, just as the protocol changes through the study, then the ethics review with that is required again, right? So as a study is living and breathing for its whole life cycle, so are the need for reviews and checks and things like that. So sometimes it's not just a matter of, well, maybe we can get so and so to help us in the beginning. That's always great and always very welcome. But you may also have to think about, well, what happens when something happens in the middle of the study? Can we call on that person again, or do we have somebody else to reach out to? So things to think about, and things that a sponsor will be thinking about when they look at their sites. This all leads into the data quality that you will be, the quality of data that you will be able to submit to the researchers who are looking at it and trying to answer the questions. Without that data, everything is not. This is all for naught. So it's really important that we've got not only just data to give them, but data that we can feel solid about, that was produced in an environment that could be reproduced not only in one site, but in multi-sites around the world. So high quality data with high quality teams producing, you know, good out. And when we talk about quality data, that doesn't necessarily mean producing data that you know, data for anyone. That means honest, real, true data, right? Whether that's looking like maybe good for a drug or something is not for us to say. We just want the real true results, and getting that can be, you know, difficult. You want to make sure everybody knows what they're doing. Okay. With different sites comes just different infrastructure and resources. So let's think about some of that here. Okay. If we think about just technology, do you have, does a site have servers and, you know, the internet capabilities that they will need in order to not only collect the data, but enter it into a system and then send it somewhere? Not only just the ability to send it, but to send it in a safe and secure way that's protected, right? So that's one of our ultimate goals, is making sure that the data we collect is safe and protected. Not all studies require labs, but a lot of the studies that we might interact with will. And so with that, we have to think about the whole process of not only drawing blood or collecting any specimen for that matter, but then storing it in a safe and consistent temperature long enough until we can either get it to the processing site or maybe just to the postal site that will deliver it. And then you know, then we'll take it from there. So all of that to say, when thinking about site selection, they will look at laboratory availability, and then again, the availability of any staff on hand to perform those services. That goes right in hand with the next bullet point, which is just staff and expertise, which flows with everything that we've been talking about up until now. Space always seems like a very straightforward, easy kind of hurdle, but with specifically with clinical trials, if you're working with a sponsor or a pharmaceutical company, oftentimes they will send a lot of stuff, just a lot of stuff that you were then, not the site, that the site is then responsible for maintaining. And so that again, see, well, sure, we can put it in the closet or whatever, but sometimes these things can add up to some real space, some real floor space, or some real maybe refrigeration space. And so it's really something to consider and think about as you're moving forward. And then the last bullet point, recruitment and retention capability. Again, you just have to think do we have enough of a local prevalence of whatever we may be studying to do it here? And that's just the start of it. So if you do, then you have to take a lot of other things into consideration when it comes to human participants. And sometimes that means just people's perception of research, right? Sometimes it's not, there's not always a level of trust with research like there might be with somebody's medical provider. And that makes perfect sense. We're not acting as medical providers in this instance. We are researchers. So, you know, being respectful and mindful of the relationships and the fact that research is entirely based on consent and voluntary consent at that. So, you know, sometimes we might have participants who meet all of the inclusion exclusion criteria, but just do not want to participate, and we have to respect that. So, you know, just the perception of research is something we have to take into consideration. Okay, we talked a little bit about this, but thinking again about drug and supply management, shelf space goes quicker than you think. And lab kits, if you're working with a trial that does involve lab kits of any type, and particularly if they are organized by participant visit, you may have a separate box or kit for each visit. So it, again, like the real estate just goes really pretty quickly, and you always are convinced that you have it until you get the shipment and go, oh my goodness, I don't know if we have the room. So just something to consider. Expiration dates. Some studies are very rapid moving, and you move through supplies so quickly it's not even on your radar. Some studies are pretty slow moving, and we might be working with investigational products or drugs that we don't, you know, that might not last long. So we have to really think about always keeping an eye on the expiration dates of what we're working with. And then if we're in a study where we're having supplies or medications that are meeting those expiration dates, what to do to dispose of them. With study materials, oftentimes you never just throw anything away when you're done with it. The research it's all investigational, right? So they want to be very careful about not only what they distribute, but what's returned if it's unused. So they don't want just investigational drugs floating around, which makes perfect sense. But because of that, often many things have to be returned to a study if they're unused or if they meet their expiration date. So knowing again who to contact, what do you do, how do you get more product if that's the case, and then keeping in consideration trying to time the arrival of that product in a way that doesn't interrupt the study participant visits. So there's not only storage, but then we think of just shipment of materials, particularly in the international sense. So customs adds a level of difficulty to any shipment situation, particularly when we are shipping what we might call investigational product or study drugs. So not only having somebody on hand that can help navigate those things, again, fully recognizing that many research sites don't have staff on hand, but also recognizing that the shipment of international materials is fully a full-time job in and of itself. And just only to say that it's a lot to know. So, and needing help with it or needing assistance is in no way shameful. Everybody should, would. I certainly do sometimes. So, just knowing if you have resources. Again, thinking about the storage conditions in transit, if you have a temperature sensitive drug and you need to get it to a refrigeration point, what happens if the truck breaks down or if there's a delay in shipment? Is the packaging sufficient? And then not only is the packaging sufficient, but do you have the materials in the packaging to let you know if there was a deviation or if it got too hot or too cold? So, making sure that not even if it's just arriving seemingly safe, but having that hard, the hard information or data to show us that it actually was safe during the journey. Okay, so that's a lot to think about. And then we're going to kind of focus just a little bit about specifically what it means to think about regulatory and ethical hurdles when it comes to human subjects. And when we think about human subjects in clinical research or any research, that really refers to not only human people, but human data and human specimens. So when we think about regulatory and ethical hurdles as they relate to humans, we have to think about humans in kind of all of these categories as it relates to research. Okay, so taking care of our human subjects is really, it should be of utmost importance. It should be one of the highest it should be something that we should look at as an honor, right? Like it shouldn't be something that we look at as something we have to do. Hopefully it's something you see as a privilege. And the participants that are there voluntarily. They do not have to be there. There is nothing that requires that. And a lot of the times they're not only there voluntarily, but they're there during a really hard time of their own personal care. So to not only try to manage someone's own medical care, but maybe then put clinical research on top of it is a big lift and it's a big ask. And we should just be very, very vigilant of that and thankful of that as we go through our work with human subjects. On that note, anytime we have human subjects, we will be required to give them what's called informed consent, a document that explains to them each part of the research study. But just as we talked about a research study being a living, breathing thing, consent might change throughout the study as well. If something happens in the study that we need to inform participants of, we may need to re-consent them. So consent, really, we never want to think about it as a document. We want to really think of consent as a conversation that starts at the beginning and it goes through as however long that participant is in the study. So it's really a conversation. And again, we in this capacity as researchers, as a research team, they are putting a lot of trust in us. You know, we are coming to people saying that we have drugs and we don't know how they will impact you, because that's the truth. We don't know how these drugs will will help or maybe not help. We don't know. That's why we're researching, right? And that's the whole point. But we have to be very transparent about that in our work with participants and letting them know we don't know. And so with the I don't know conversation comes a lot of trust, because you are, really exposing something, and just having a spirit of honesty throughout the study. And then again, research can often come very, very close to overlapping or intersecting with medical care. And that's wonderful because, they're very similar in nature, but they are still so uniquely different. And in that difference comes a very, very different set of regulations and ethical guidelines to adhere by. So it's just something to always be mindful of. Oh, and then last but not least, and this is really important, mistakes happen, right? Protocol deviations will happen. You will have people miss their study visits because they're human people. And so, but with science, we're really trying to make sure things happen in the same way each time. My point in saying that is, if somebody misses an appointment, that's okay, but we do need to report it. So even thinking about things when it comes to clinical research about if everything doesn't happen the exact way we've laid it out, how we're going to record and document that. And again, that can feel kind of scary because it can feel kind of like you're exposing some mistakes or showing somebody what you've done wrong. Well, in a sense, you are, but that's okay. That's part of the research process, right? We are working with human participants. If there are no mistakes, then we're going to start to think, wait a minute, this might be too perfect, right? Not that those don't happen. Of course, there are gold star studies, but they do happen, and that's okay. That's okay. Just know where and how to report it. Okay. When we think about ethical approval, so we're thinking about the IRB approval or the ethical committee, there are pros and cons. Now, in this context, for this slide, we are thinking about local IRB approval happening at each individual site, as opposed to having many sites operating at once and having review take place at one central site. So we'll talk about the pros and cons of each, but first we're thinking about having local review at each site. So there are pros, and it's that they know their community, right? IRBs and ethics committees are made up of community members, so they know their community and they will hopefully have insight on how best to serve their community. So that's a huge plus. A challenge can be that you are asking many different sites to review one study protocol. And while the study protocol is the exact same, the brains at each site that interpret the study protocol will undoubtedly have a slightly different view each time. It's just human nature, right? We all think a little bit differently. That's what makes us great. So, but in that could mean that your reproducibility at each site starts to vary slightly because maybe the interpretation's different. Oh, and then there's also with that comes another greater administrative burden, right? We're not asking one board to review, we're asking maybe 8 boards to review. So, duplication of effort. Okay, so then thinking about what are the pros and cons of having one IRB or ethical review for many different sites. And sometimes, again, that might be a regulatory requirement. We might not even have a choice. So that's one time that we use that method, that model. The pros being that it streamlines approval because instead of waiting for maybe 8 sites, we're just waiting for 1 site to review and approve. And then again, it increases that kind of consistency in review and then efficiency because you're doing it once instead of so many different times. And then kind of just exactly, it's almost a perfect balance here if you look at the screen. So then the challenges are some of the most wonderful pros of our local IRB reviews in that we might be overlooking some area specific sensitivity, local sensitivities, right? We want to be really sensitive to the communities we're coming into. And when one review is viewing it for different spots, you might start to lose context down the road of how this protocol impacts this community. So, again, some of the challenges. And then it might not be accepted everywhere. So it works on both sides of the chart. Okay. Country-specific regulatory requirements. Again, the regulatory requirements in each country are different. So you're going to have to think about that. Along with the ethical board review approvals, those are, country specific as well. And then just with how fast in some, not all countries, but some countries are very quickly changing in terms of regulation. And some regulation really doesn't change that often. So again, it's just a matter of having people on the ground in each area to help you through this as a team effort to make it easier. And then again, as we already talked about, making sure that each site has great training and education throughout, because without that, our study really starts the consistency and the quality of the data starts to crumble really, really fast. And then with multi-site studies, as with any good old team project, most of the time this means that we're as fast as our slowest partner. So just because you might have approval in one site doesn't necessarily mean that study can begin if not all of the sites have approval. So this is a true team project. This isn't while we're working with them, but they're doing their own thing. Yes, there are people on the ground managing their own thing, but we are all truly working under one framework when we start to work in a multi-site clinical trial, because we become a team then. Of course, communication can be one of the most challenging things when we think about multi-site studies, particularly when we think about international multi-site studies. Time zones get real tricky real fast, and it gets real hard to just sometimes throw together a meeting like it might be if we were all sitting together at the same table. So keeping that in mind and thinking about that as we work with our collaborators is always really important. And then just with that comes just a spirit of flexibility, right? So I live with 2 dogs, and in my household, sometimes you stand with your knees bent, because if a dog gets excited and runs, if your knees are bent, you won't fall down. So thinking about keeping our knees bent as we work with our international partners helps us to just stay bendy and flexible and easily adaptable to the needs of our partners. When we think about our larger studies, sometimes you may have site visits or monitors that need to come and kind of keep a hand on what is going on and the quality of what's happening, and making sure that things are on par. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You know, when can we kind of work that into a when can we accommodate that into the whole thing as well? So can't say it often enough. Plan ahead and communicate often. It's the biggest key to success in any multi-site study you'll ever do. Well, as if that weren't enough, there are just a few more challenges to think about. As I mentioned, staff turnover can happen. So consistent communication is the ultimate key to success. And then making sure that we are educating our team on the ground is the best way to honor the time and energy of the participants that are helping us. Because if we don't give them the highest quality service there, then we're doing them a disservice with their time. Worth saying twice, wink, wink, plan ahead and communicate often. I just can't say it enough. It's really, truly the best way to stay successful. I know that was a lot of information. That's okay. Don't worry. You're not alone. Many people are feeling a little anxious after hearing that kind of information. But truly knowing your resources, knowing who to reach out to, you know, staying in contact with your research community around you, that's the best way to really stay successful. So who you know is a lot of the battle in research, not in any sense of a elitist way, but more in the more communication you have, the better teamwork skills you have, the more successful you'll be. And don't forget that what you are all doing is really, really important and inspiring work. This is a lot of information, but you are all incredibly bright people and you'll do great with it. The important part is just that you know about it and you are aware, which is 90% of the battle. And then just as a quick thank you on my part, this I just want to dedicate to somebody important in my life who was a research study participant. And again, what you're all doing is amazing and important, and research in any capacity is wonderful. And thank you for doing it and doing it well. And thank you for listening. And I think now we'll go into a Q&A if I'm correct.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julie. That was
Of course.
practical. Wow, that was really practical. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Most of what you shared with us now, for those of us from sites that are already doing some form of clinical trials, you resonate with us. You resonate with us. I like that bit of ensure that there's no harm in saying it twice and saying it many, many times. And
That's
then,
right.
oh no, it was really practical. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, yeah, you're right. This is time for Q&A. Please, if you have any questions for Julie, there are some of the things that she said now that even this training, we have to think about communication, time zones. We have to like look at all of that. And this is just training, not to even talk about trials or research. So if you have any questions, please, you can, I think what we'll do, I don't think, admin team, please look in the chat to see if there are any questions there. But if anybody wants to ask, please just indicate by raising your hand, and then you'll be unmuted so that you could ask your question. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you all for having me. I really can't thank you enough. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I really mean it when I say the work that you're doing is amazing. So it's an honor for me to be a part of your journey. And I know that sometimes it's hard to come up with questions on the spot. So, if you can't think of anything now, I don't know how contacts work, but I have like a LinkedIn, or I'm findable. But just know that, again, like, it's great what you're doing, and reach out to the people that are available to you in your journey as you go.
Thank you. So questions. Participants, we have questions. I can't see clearly, but please, admin team, once you see any hand raised, please just notify. Can't seem to see. Okay, so I think there's a question in the chat.
Okay, let's see. What do you do if participants withdraw their consents along the course of clinical trials? That's a great question. So, yeah, and that happens. That happens for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes the participant is unhappy. Sometimes it's just logistical. Maybe the family is moving somewhere and they just can't be part of the trial anymore. Having, again, that open conversation and that sense of voluntary participation along the way is what we owe to our participants. So if we have withdrawals, and they happen, again, for many, many reasons, right? We're working with humans. Then there's oftentimes what they might refer to like a closeout visit that might occur, or something along those lines. But we would just refer to what the study protocol asks us to do to make sure that everything's kind of been closed out nicely. And then, we wrap up with the participant, and we wish them well. And sometimes it happens more often than you would think. And again, that's okay, right? No, never a problem. So.
Still
Yeah.
another question in the chat. It says, my question regarding challenges in a multi-site trial is whether the language is a challenge, especially in Africa, because each country has various kinds of mother tongues, English, French, and all that. So if you're doing like an international study.
Yes, that's another really great question. Thank you so much. Yes, language is a huge thing to consider. I don't want to say a barrier. It's not a barrier, but it is something we have to think about because we have to make sure from an ethics perspective that the study participant fully understands in their native language and has been presented the information in a language that they can understand, and also that they can have a conversation in, because again, it's a conversation throughout, right? So yes, it's something we really have to think about. And sometimes that means having staff on hand, trained study staff that are able to speak different languages. And it also means that we have to have our written documentation translated. And sometimes it's not only a matter of having it translated, but then it might have to be certified, and then after the translation, then reviewed through the ethics board again. So again, when different languages come into play, then there's different things to consider and different ways to kind of think about preparing so that nothing gets too stopped or kinked up.
Okay, so thank you. I can see two hands up, so we'll just take the two. I can see Uma Beta. Uma Beta, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Umar from Ethiopia, and I really appreciate the presentation. That was very good. Everything is complete. So I have two questions. The first question is related to challenges. Now, regulatory and IRB is one of the challenges in conducting clinical trial. So based on the GCP, these two things are mandatory, and how can it be a challenge? Should it be
Yes.
clear for me? Yeah. And the second question is related to site selections and site initiation. Do we have a difference between both of things, and who is responsible, and in which criteria that we should have to select sites, and how we initiate clinical trial site study? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so in relation to your first question, and please, if I start to stray or if I don't answer your question, feel free to jump in. I'm a very casual person, and I want to make sure that I answer all parts of your question. That's most important. Okay, in relation to how does GCP or the good clinical practice apply to regulatory and IRB ethics approval? So the good clinical practice is definitely incorporated into most ethical review committee reviews, right? So the way that they kind of review things has been built off of several different standards and committees worldwide over the years. So they take from, you know, they take from all kinds of things, like things from the Nuremberg trial to good clinical practice. And so in the ethics review, hopefully you're also capturing that. So it's another just kind of safety net to make sure that we're doing things at the highest standards. So really good question, and thank you.
So thank you. I can see that Suleiman has his hand has been up, so we'll take that and then just take one or two other from the chat.
Perfect.
So Suleiman, Eliazid, you can unmute and ask your question. It doesn't seem to be. Eliazid, if you can hear us, unmute and your hand is up or it was inadvertently raised. Okay, so we'll move on. Julie, I think a couple of questions on the chat. Okay. If you could look them up.
Okay. How can monitoring and auditing be effective? Oh, do we have a question? Okay, no problem. Okay, so how can monitoring and auditing be effectively carried out in multi-site studies? Oof. Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a big task. And again, the central component in all of that is communication, communication, communication. So in multi-site studies or trials, it's often, if we're working in larger clinical trials, then there may be one of those CROs that will help us in making sure that trained monitors are getting to each site and then, you know, carrying out the same standards of monitoring everywhere. If you don't have the luxury of having a CRO, that can be a lot harder. It comes down to having a lot of team meetings and making sure that the team's on board and that everybody is really like understanding what the expectations are and what's going on. And, you know, we all are getting pretty good at Zoom now, like we're all getting better at it. So oftentimes that can be a really, really effective tool in monitoring multi-site studies these days because we can do a lot virtually too. So thank you for your question. And again, if I haven't answered anyone's question thoroughly before moving on, just stop me, but I'll go to the next one now. Let's see. Okay. In the design. Oh, and you know what? I'm so sorry. I think Omar, I didn't answer your second half of your question. So if it's okay, I might just do that really quick and then I'll go back right to the chat. But I'm having this extreme pang of guilt. And I believe it was site selection and site initiation. Is that right?
Yes, you're right. I was waiting it.
I am so sorry. Please, my apologies. Okay, so what is the difference between site selection and site initiation? So when they're thinking about site selection, it might involve a lot of different sites. There might be looking at a lot of different places and the kind of eligibility criteria for the sites in and of themselves are being considered. Site initiation is kind of the next step. So that's once the site has already been selected, and then you kind of get to the step where you're starting to build the study with either the CRO or the study team itself directly to kind of get the site up and running and making sure everything's ready. Hopefully that answered your question, and my sincere apologies again for forgetting. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I'll go back to the chat. All right, in the design and execution of a multi-site clinical trial, what are the key considerations for site selection? And how does adoption of the CDISC data standards influence data integration, regulatory submission, and overall trial efficiency? Please forgive me if I am so sorry, but I'm not familiar with the actual CDISC data standards. So I'll try to talk to everything else, but I'm not familiar with those specifically, so I'd have to look them up. But in terms of thinking about data standards when it comes to site selection for a trial, it's really kind of at the back of the minds of everybody when selecting a site is what kind of data will be able to be produced. The questions that you ask that kind of lead up to that are, can you meet your enrollment goals? Do you have the study staff to effectively run the study, administer the study drug, capture the study data, monitor adverse events, etc.? Because the answers to all of those questions ultimately affect the data output. And it really does have a strong influencing factor on the site selection. So really good question. And not only the site selection, but the trial efficiency. I mean, what is this, the saying? I think is science is based on rigor and reproducibility, right? So when we think about, you know, keeping things at kind of this like exactly the same pace, so that we could reproduce the exact same scenario across the world, it's it just leads to better trial efficiency, right? When everybody's doing the same thing. So hopefully that answered your question. Let's see. I'm scrolling down. Stop me. I'll just keep scrolling down for questions until I'm stopped. So, all right. Do we have multinational site studies with a single IRB? How successful are these studies? Really good question. So, yes, there are multinational studies with a single IRB. However, that really, although they say there's a single IRB, what it really is still somewhat limited to is if you have studies occurring in one country. So for example, let's say we have a multi-site study and we have the US and Nigeria and France. And each of those countries, because we're all so different, will all still require some type of ethical approval. Most likely will all require some type of ethical approval in that country to address those study participants, right? Because we want to make sure that we're being sensitive about location and again, I'm not going to be an expert on what affects somebody in another country. So we may have one review of a study protocol, but oftentimes we still have multinational ethic review happening. So it's a lot of moving parts, and I know it can be confusing, but hopefully that kind of answered that. Oh, how successful are these studies? I'm sorry, please.
I think, please permit me to chime in here. I think because we're getting towards the top of the hour, I think let me just permit me to just read out 2 additional questions from the chat for you to address. And then just to tell the participants that the rest of the questions, Julie will answer them and then would make them available at the next session because we don't want to necessarily overshoot our time. So Julie, there's a question that says, who decides if a participant or group of them require an official translation of the questionnaire or consent documents to preserve integrity of data and consent? Who decides?
Yeah, so that would be the ethics committee or the
Yeah.
IRB committee that's reviewing that study.
That's
That
okay.
should be always something at the forefront of their brain.
Okay. Then there's the other one that says what should be done if a site discovers that a participant was consented with an outdated version of the ICF after the participant has already exited the study.
Great question. And here's the thing, these things happen. They absolutely happen, and it can feel, again, really scary. I hope it doesn't feel that way, because the important thing is that you know what to do in that situation. And the first thing to do in that situation is report it to your IRB or your ethics committee, right? And then they work with you to say, okay, how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? And then how are we going to make sure the participant gets the right consent? And then you're going to move forward. So just knowing who to contact, and just being okay about disclosing what's happening on your end.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your time today. We thank you for the very lucid presentation and the responses to the questions. Please, once again, participants, we're going to like collate those questions, and then she will provide answers, and then would make it available. For those who are asking if there's no like a pre-test today, no, we've already done the pre-test. The post-evaluation is what we're going to do at the end of the sessions. Okay, so once again, I don't know if Professor Nodu is able to speak now so that she can close us. But while we're waiting to see if she can do that, I want to thank Julie once again, and also thank you, Kathy, for all the coordination. Professor Nodu, over to you, ma.
Yes, yes, thank you. Let me just see if I can unmute myself. Yes. Okay, let's see. Oh, I'm muting myself. Okay. Yes, okay, excellent. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited, to listen to Julie's wonderful presentation today. It's been wonderful just hearing you, and I'm delighted that we have so many people join the session today, even as far afield as Ethiopia. And I know we have someone from South Sudan. So I think the message is going out. But before I say any other thing, I want to appreciate the presence of the desk officer for sickle cell disease by the way of, in the person of Dr. Alayos Shopweko, who is the director in charge of sickle cell disease at the Federal Ministry of Health and Social Welfare. Dr. Alayo, thank you for being here consistently from the beginning. We appreciate you and the work you're doing. Katie, thank you so much for partnering with us and for getting such sterling quality presenter, to speak with us. Julie, thank you so much. Well, I enjoyed every bit of your presentation, because a lot of the international trials in sickle cell disease now are multi-site, and you're really, what you have said resonates very much with us. So I want to thank everyone, for their participation. And remember that we are going to have a paper for the SparkNet leads at the end of this, and we are just it's just going to be very interesting to put together our experience and our readiness for multi-site clinical trials in future. So thank you, thank you, thank you. God bless you all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a real
Yes, Julie.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Until next
Thank
week.
you.
Okay.
Have a beautiful night rest for those of us that
Okay.
is evening.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
you,
you.
Julie.
Good night. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.